Most people think addiction is about pleasure, about chasing highs, breaking rules, losing control. But Carl Jung saw something deeper, something darker. He believed addiction isn't about the substance. It's about the absence of connection, the absence of meaning, the absence of the self. Addiction, he said, is a spiritual problem, not just a psychological one. It's what happens when a person loses their relationship with their own soul. And instead of going inward, they reach outward, grasping, clinging, consuming. Not because they want more, but because they feel like less. We see the addict's behavior, the chaos, the damage, the repetition. But what we don't see, what we don't want to see, is the pain underneath it, the longing, the confusion, the quiet belief, I can't survive myself unless I escape. Some use alcohol, others use sex. Some use work, achievement, people-pleasing, scrolling, shopping, sugar, religion, even relationships. But it's all the same shape. A desperate attempt to fill what's missing, to calm what's screaming inside. Jung believed that every addiction is an unconscious ritual, a symbolic attempt to restore what's broken, to feel powerful where you once felt helpless, to feel safe where you once felt abandoned, to feel alive when everything else feels numb. And the addict isn't chasing pleasure, they're chasing relief. A few seconds where the noise stops, where the shame fades, where they don't feel like a burden inside their own skin. But that moment never lasts. And when it fades, the shame comes back stronger. So they run again, and again, and again. That's not weakness. That's repetition. And repetition is how the unconscious cries for help. Addiction doesn't start with a bottle, or a pill, or a screen. It starts much earlier, in moments most people don't even remember. Moments that look ordinary. A child crying and no one coming. A question asked and never answered. An emotion expressed and punished. A need ignored, ridiculed, minimized. So the child learns, I'm too much. I'm inconvenient. I'm safest when I disappear. And in that disappearance, something splits. The child stops trusting their own feelings. They stop expressing needs. They stop taking up space. Carl Jung called this the birth of the shadow. The parts of the self that get rejected not because they're wrong, but because they were never welcomed. And what we exile, we eventually try to numb. That child grows up with a smile. They become helpful, high-functioning, charming. They know how to say the right thing, how to keep the peace, how to be what others need. But under all that polish is a gnawing emptiness, an ache for something they can't name, a craving not just for dopamine, but for wholeness. Because they never got to be a full person, just a role, a version of themselves they had to create to survive the emotional environment they were born into. And here's the cruel twist. The world rewards that version, claps for their productivity, praises their resilience, admires how strong they are, never realizing that strength was born from abandonment. So they keep performing. And when the pain breaks through, late at night, or in the silence after achievement, they reach for something to take the edge off. A drink, a scroll, a binge, a lie. Not to feel good, but to stop feeling at all. That's the cycle. The deeper the wound, the more sophisticated the escape. And the longer it goes unseen, the more real it feels. But Jung never said addiction made you broken. He said it made you disconnected. From your past, from your truth, and most of all, from yourself. At some point, the addict realizes something terrifying. They're not chasing pleasure. They're not even escaping pain. They're looking for something they can't name. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." But what if addiction isn't avoidance? What if it's a search? A misguided, desperate attempt to feel something real? Because what they're running from is emptiness. Not the dramatic kind. Not loud. Not cinematic. Just that constant low-frequency ache that hums beneath everything. A feeling that nothing's enough. That they're not enough. That no matter what they consume, achieve, or control, there's always something missing. And when that emptiness becomes unbearable, they reach. Not just for substances, but for meaning, for transcendence, for connection, even if it's counterfeit. Jung believed that addiction is a corrupted form of spiritual longing, a sacred need, misdirected. It's the psyche's way of saying, "I'm in exile, and I want to come home." But instead of home, we find habit. We drink to feel alive. We scroll to feel distracted. We chase people who treat us like our wounds, inconsistent, conditional, unavailable. Because deep down, there's a part of us that believes love has to be earned, that peace is temporary, that we don't deserve to rest unless we're performing. And so the addict keeps reaching. And the more they reach, the further they drift from what they're actually craving. Not control, not escape, not even peace, but reunion. A reunion with the part of themselves that got left behind. The younger self who was never comforted. The real self who never felt safe enough to exist. The soul they abandoned to survive. And until that reunion happens, nothing else works. Not rehab, not productivity, not positive thinking, because the wound is still there. Quiet, wide, waiting. There's a moment when the cycle breaks. Not with force, not with a breakthrough, but with exhaustion. A kind of spiritual fatigue that seeps through your bones and whispers, "I can't keep running from myself." That's when the real work begins. Not the fixing, not the achieving, not the striving, but the remembering. Remembering the parts of you you buried, the child you silenced, the voice you muted, the truths you swallowed to survive. Carl Jung believed that healing begins not when you eliminate the addiction, but when you finally face the need behind it. Not as a weakness, but as a message. The addict isn't broken. They're calling. They're asking the only way they know how. Can someone meet me where I stopped existing? Jung wasn't alone in this belief. Nietzsche once wrote, "Invisible threads are the strongest ties." And addiction, in its most unconscious form, is an attempt to grasp those threads, to tie yourself back to meaning, to belonging, to life. Diogenes saw human dependence on wealth, on attention, on desire, not as sin, but as blindness. He mocked the polished, the pious, the performative, because he knew the one who needs nothing is finally free. But the addict is still needing, still hoping, still reaching for a feeling that life has withheld. And that's okay, because the beginning of awakening is not in power. It's in surrender. When you stop trying to fix your pain like a project, and instead sit with it like a wounded friend. When you stop seeing your craving as shame, and start hearing it as a signal. When you realize that the version of you who chased, who drank, who binged, was just trying to feel whole. And now you get to meet that version. Not to erase them, but to listen. If this resonates, if any part of you feels seen in these words, subscribe, quietly. Not because this journey will fix you, but because it may finally make you feel less alone in it. Addiction is not the enemy. It's the symptom, the flare from a mind that split itself to survive. It's the call of the shadow, the part of the self that was denied, exiled, disowned. Carl Jung believed that the path to wholeness leads through the shadow, not around it, not above it, through it. And for many, addiction is the shadow, loud, messy, repetitive, shameful. But underneath the mess is material. Material for integration. Material for awakening. The drink isn't just a drink. It's a key, a door, a repeated invitation to look at what you keep trying to silence. Because addiction doesn't lie. It tells you exactly where your pain is, where the rupture began, where the self was first split. But most people never ask. They just numb. They fight the craving without asking what it's craving for. Is it safety? Is it permission to rest? Is it the need to be touched, to be heard, to be witnessed without judgment? Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And that's what addiction does. It directs your life behind the curtain. It becomes your ritual, your pattern, your God. But once you name it, not with shame, but with clarity, it loses its power. Not because it disappears, but because it becomes integrated. Suddenly, the wine glass isn't a monster. It's a mirror. The scroll isn't your master. It's your message. And what once ruled you, now teaches you. Nietzsche said, "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star." And maybe addiction is the chaos before creation. Not a defect, but a dark initiation, a test, a threshold. The moment you choose to keep running, or to finally turn and face yourself. And in that turn, that sacred pivot, the real self begins to return. Healing doesn't look like triumph. It looks like confusion, like sitting alone in a room, craving something you know will destroy you, and choosing, just for today, not to reach for it. And then doing that again tomorrow. There's no applause, no gold star, no transformation scene like in movies. Just breath, just presence, just the small, stubborn act of staying in your body, in your truth, in your pain. Carl Jung knew that wholeness doesn't come from light alone. It comes from walking through the dark without flinching. He wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And when you stop numbing your pain, you begin to meet your truth. The buried grief, the quiet rage, the longing that never had words. And you feel everything, sometimes all at once. Old memories, uncried tears, emotions that have been waiting years to be acknowledged. You realize the addiction wasn't the enemy. It was the anesthetic. It protected you when you didn't have the tools. It soothed you when nothing else did. And now you finally have the strength to feel what you couldn't back then. So you begin to move differently. You speak slower. You leave rooms that feel wrong. You stop saying, "I'm fine," when you're not. You start asking what you need instead of punishing yourself for having needs at all. And slowly, you stop identifying as the addict. You start seeing yourself as the one who survived, who endured, who adapted brilliantly, even if the adaptation became destructive. Because now you're not surviving, you're choosing. And choice is power. You might still crave, you might still fall, But even in the fall, you'll land closer to your truth. Because you're no longer hiding. You're no longer outsourcing your peace. You're no longer terrified of the voice in your own head. You're listening. And for the first time, you believe what you hear. No one tells you this, but healing is boring. It's not a cinematic redemption arc. It's not a dramatic before and after. It's sitting alone in a quiet room, breathing through a craving, and surviving it. Not because you've become stronger, but because you've become softer with yourself. Carl Jung wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Not just the light, not just the parts that look good online, but the craving, the fear, the dependency, the ache. And when you finally stop seeing those things as enemies and start seeing them as parts of you calling out for attention, everything changes. You don't resist the pain. You make room for it. You don't hate the addiction. You ask it what it's trying to protect. You stop trying to fix yourself like a broken machine and start honoring yourself like someone who survived. That's when the noise quiets. Not forever, but enough. Enough to feel a new kind of strength. Not the kind that fights, but the kind that doesn't flinch. And maybe that's what Jung meant by individuation. Not perfection, not enlightenment, but integration. The moment you stop being at war with yourself. So here's the question. What if your craving isn't trying to destroy you, but trying to lead you home? What if the thing you fear the most, your own shadow, is actually where your freedom lives? And if that question lingers, if it sticks to your ribs long after this video ends, then you're ready for what's next. Because once you've faced the part of you that consumes, you're ready to confront the part of you that compromises, that tolerates what should have ended, that bows when it should walk away. In the next video, we'll expose the 7 subtle but humiliating mistakes that destroy your power, and how Machiavelli warned against them centuries ago.